So, um, couple of things about the midterm. Um, it's not perfect, right? It doesn't tell you what's your final grade or anything like that, but it is kind of the best predictor we have, right? Um, so if you keep doing what you are doing, chances are you'll keep getting the results you're getting, right? So if you got 110 on your test, whatever you're doing, keep doing that, right? Um, if you got a 40, then you need to change what you're doing, right? Um, it might be, and this is kind of general for all the other classes that you may be taking or something like that, right? It may be that you ought to consider dropping one of them, right? Withdrawing from one of them to allow more time to concentrate on other ones, if that is the case, right? Um, on Wednesday, May the 3rd, is the last day for you to withdraw while still getting a grade of W, right? That is bad. You don't want to do it, but it may be the best solution, right? After that, you get a grade, and if you get a bad grade, a D or an F, in the class or in any class, that makes your whole the rest of your graduate studies very, very hard, right? Once you get below 3.0, you go on probation and horrible things happen, right? So make sure you don't, right? Um, so it may be that the right solution is to withdraw from one of them, right? You still lose your money, it still counts, still appears on your transcripts, it's still bad, but it's better than enough, right? If you want specific things, come talk to me. And the way that I see, I tend to kind of group you guys or group the grades into three pies, right? One is 100. You got 100, right? Or 100. Exam was over 110 on purpose because I'm assuming that even if you know everything, you're gonna mess something up, and I'm gonna take points off, right? So the exam is over 100. Some of you actually got extra points, right? Which is good. Um, but if you got 100, then life is good. Keep doing what you're doing, right? Don't don't get too confident, but for the most part, right, life is good, right? Um, you should be okay. I'm expecting you to get an A in the class, and that's kind of my expectation, right? And probably should be yours, right? Now, if you got a 40, and there were like 2 or 3 people who got something like a 40 on the test, then that's when you seriously need to consider dropping the class or um, consider seriously changing how you study. Now, the third pile is kind of you got a warning, right? If you got something like a 60 or 70, right, then that's the okay, you're not quite there yet. If you're not, chances are that you won't fail the class, right? Because you should get 100 on the assignments, and so once you average that out, right, you're going to end up with um, a high 70 or an 80 or something like that, right? But you're not doing good, and so you need to um, analyze what happened, right? If you look at the test, kind of it's prime was one of the assignments, right? And the other ones were like the assignments or even easier, right? And so what happened, right? If you had even, I would say, if you got a 70 or something like that, but it's because you did all the basic stuff and you messed up his prime or something like that, then that's a possibility, right? But some people got like they couldn't define a variance. It's like God, right? That's something that you really need to go over this stuff and make sure that that you understand terminology, you know what's the difference between a variable and a function, and that kind of stuff, right? So if you didn't get a great grade, think about it, figure out what can you do to improve, and what's the cause, right? Maybe you weren't feeling well that day or something like that. It's a possibility, but be honest with yourself and decide whether that's what happened or you need to study more or differently. Unfortunately, we don't get that many tests, and so this is kind of a big deal. For me, it's also a big deal because it's probably the best predictor for the final exam, right? Chances are that the same stuff is going to happen in the final. Any questions or issues with this stuff? No? We are ready for the next stuff? We are ready for loops? Good. Loops are the other way of looping. Now, we have seen that we can use recursion to go over a bunch of values, right? We can make it go over the integers, we can make it go, right? That kind of stuff. We have done that. Now, there are more direct ways of doing that, and that is with a loop. A loop is just that, a programming construct that will let us do something a bunch of times. And we are going to define what exactly does a bunch of times means, right? For the most part, it means it's going to let us do something while some condition is true, right? So the two more basic loops are the do while and the while. We'll see all of them. Most people tend to choose one of them, and kind of most people tend to choose while. The do while is not very common. What's the difference between them? The do while should first ask questions later, right? It always gets executed at least once. The body of the loop, the stuff that goes inside. In the while loop, you check the condition first, and only if it is true, then you go and do it. Once you get to the end of the body of the loop, once you get to the closing brace, then it will go back to here, evaluate the condition again, and decide where to go once more, right? Does that idea make sense? What does this tell you? What do you need to do inside the body of your loop? Sorry?
Inside the body, the increment or something like that.
Yes, right? You need to somehow change that condition, because if not, what happens? You end up in an infinite loop, right? You keep doing it forever, right? Somewhere inside here, in this do stuff part, you need to do something that will affect your condition, right? Does that idea make sense? Now let's look at actual examples. We did something like this, right, for recursion. Read and sum would be read from the user and eventually return the sum of the numbers you read, right? So we would have our sum. We declare a variable to keep track of the input, and then print something. And we are reading until the user enters 0. So we read that number, add it to the sum, while the input is different than 0. So what this would do is actually keep going through this loop, right? How many times does this execute? At least one, right? And potentially many more depending on what the user enters, right? Could this execute only 0 times? No, because it's a do while, right? Should first ask questions later. Does that idea make sense? Do you understand how it works? Yes, no, maybe. Presumably yes. Cool. Notice that we are cheating, and many times when we do this kind of stuff, we end up having more if statements, right? Here we are processing the input, even if it's the last one. Why? Why are we allowed to do this? Should we process, right? When the user enters the last 0, should we add it to the sum?
No.
No, right? So we probably should have an if statement, except that, well, it's 0. So if we add it, it's perfectly okay. Does that make sense? So we are cheating a little bit. We probably should have an if statement or something like that.
So in that case, like only the while loop would suffice, right? No need for the do loop.
With this, could we do a while loop? Not really, because we need to execute the first time, right? If we were to do this with a while loop, let's go do it. We need to start cheating, right? Let's go do this stuff. So I'm gonna create a new class. New class. Today is Feb27 Loop samples. Yes, and eventually I will be posting this stuff, but we have this, and we need if we were to execute this, maybe. Please enter a number. We printed the sum, right? Can I just replace it? Can I just do this? And syntactically, right, I am just eliminating this. Notice that there is a semicolon at the end of a while loop. What happens? It's telling me that I haven't initialized this. What do I have to initialize it to? Let's initialize to 0. Would this work? What's the problem?
Because we initialize 0 and it has not gone for an input.
It will never, right? It will never execute because it checks first, right?
So it's same like recursion. Base case?
It is similar to recursion. This is not a base case, right? But it's a condition. Yeah, it is similar to the condition, to the base case in recursion, right? Where you have a condition that would make you finish, right? So in this case, that condition will make it finish. We can cheat, right? Oops. If we make input 1 or 25, right? Then it would work, right? Oops. Does that make sense? Problem is, well, we need some magic here, right? It's probably clearer to do it with a do while, right? Does that make sense? As another example, we can do power. Base and exponent, right? We did this with recursion 7 times, right? I will initialize my answer, which I'm calling pow, to be 1, while exponent is greater than 0, multiply pow times the base and decrease exponent, right? So I can do stuff like three to the third power. Not static. So once to run this, I'll get 27, right? Can I do this with a do while? What happens if I do this? Get the same answer, right? It's all good, right? It's the same. Maybe. What happens if I raise something to the 0th power? And turn 3 rather than 1. Why? You are shooting first and asking questions later, right? You are doing it once without checking. Does that make sense? So for something like this, a while loop would make more sense, right? So let me, oops. Oh well, let me do this. And then raise it to the 0th power, so we see that we actually return the right thing. Which is fine, right? Does this idea make sense? The idea of a while loop, the idea of a do while. There is, yes, sorry. In this case, no. It's just that the right thing to do is always do minus minus exponent. No. What's the difference between minus minus exponent and exponent minus minus? The value that that expression evaluates to, right? The end result is the same. Exponent is always decremented. Are we doing anything with that value here? We are not, so it doesn't matter. We can do it either way. I always do it this way. Because let me actually.
How can we do it with do while? Can we do it?
You could. Let's do this. But what you would need to do, and it's relatively easy to do those things, right? Is add an extra if, right? If right?
Which is same as repeating.
Yeah, you need to repeat the condition, which is ugly, right? But it does work. You need to be able to at least read the loops in either way, but most people only use a while loop. Does this idea make sense? Sorry. Let me undo this because I want to show the other one, which is the one that we use a lot. Here, what you can think of this as kind of three different pieces, right? I have this where I initialize my values, right? I have this, which is my condition. This is really the body of the loop, and this stuff is where I change my condition, right? The increment, right? It's actually not increment in this case, it's decrementing, but, right? So where I change my condition. Does that idea make sense? I can make it clearer by having a weird construct that's actually so much used that it becomes normal. I'm going to do a for loop. And in a for loop, I put the initialization, then the conditions, and then the condition, it's only one, sorry. Then the increment part, the changing. And that leaves the body of the loop prettier. Does this make sense?
So it's the combination of do while and while.
No, it is a while loop. It's just prettier. Or differently syntax. It's just a while loop. Has nothing, right? It's exactly a while loop. What it does is separates the initialization and the increment part from the body of the loop. Does this make sense? We tend to use oops. We tend to use this also for standard counting. So many times we would do int I equals 0, I less than exponent, plus plus I. I'm still counting, right? One way I was counting by cheating and going down on exponent. Here I'm having a separate variable and waiting until it gets to be exponent, right? This should work the same. So a for loop is just fancy syntax for a while loop. Slightly weird, but in a for loop, the only thing that you really need is a condition. You don't really need to have an initialization or an increment part. So just purely syntactical, don't do this, but I could do this. For what's my initialization? Nothing. What's my my increment? Sorry.
Minus x.
Well, yes, but I can just leave it there too. Right? And that's completely equivalent. It is horrible, but equivalent. Does that make sense? So a loop without a... Oops, this was without 2, right? Get that, we get the same stuff. 1 and 27. A for loop without the increment or initialization parts is just a while loop. It's just ugly syntax for a while loop. Does this make sense? Don't do it. Since we are going over the syntax, it is a possibility. Normally you don't do that, right? There are a couple of interesting keywords since we are covering everything, and then we'll go do more examples. There is break, and break, the keyword break, will get you out of the loop, as if the condition was not true anymore, and will get you to the stuff that goes after. Does that make sense? So in this, we could do, let me just leave this one, which is a pretty one. Does this make sense? Yes.
Quick study on the presentation.
Yeah, it's very small.
Oh, yes. What, you actually want to be able to read? Maybe I can. Maybe I can. It's there, right? Yes. Sure. This says get out of the loop. Go to whatever goes after the body of the loop. Does that make sense? Once we have this, does it matter is this condition ever gonna get executed? I mean, since it's the exact same thing, well, it's actually the reverse, right? This is the negation of this, right? So I can actually do this. Does this make sense? Let's try it again. So now I'm going to do right, prison sound 2. It doesn't terribly matter what this condition is, right? Well, it would be the same whether I have true or whether I have this, right? If it was a completely different condition, then it would matter. But Please enter number 1, 2, 3. Oh, and I didn't print it. I did. What happened? What did I return? Wait a minute. Why didn't it print? Oh, no, it didn't. We had tested this, right? Sorry. Oh. 6. Oh, pfft. I am an idiot. I wasn't actually putting this 6. This 0. I was thinking about it, but never actually typed it. I knew that I wanted to stop at 3, and so I was like, oh, yeah. Why isn't it stopping? Why doesn't it read my mind? I need to actually type the input before it works. Does that idea make sense? So with a break, we can put the condition kind of inside the loop. The advantage of this is that if we need to skip, right, then we just need one condition instead of 2. In fact, most of the time people would write it like this. Rather than with the do while, right? And this would work the exact same way because I'm testing in the middle. And purely syntactically, don't ever do this. Well, actually, some people like it. I can write a for loop with no initialization, true as the condition, and not change, right? Or even no condition. And that's just forever. Does that make sense? It's just really weird syntax. Don't do it. But if you ever see it, what this really means is do this forever. And it is useful because we can break here, right? Does that idea make sense? Now, the other piece is continue, right? Continue lets me skip the rest of the body of a loop and go back to checking the condition. Does that idea make sense? So imagine that I want only to add negative numbers, right? So what I can do is if input 0 break, then if input less than 0, add it, right? That is the right way. But if I want to be horrible, right? Rather than doing this, I can say if input is greater than 0, then continue. That just means skip the rest of the loop. Does that idea make sense? I do use breaks a lot. I almost never use continue. It's just confusing. It is there, it is available. You need to be able to read it just in case, right, throughout your career, because somebody will write a continue, right? On the other hand, you really just need to learn 1, maybe 2 kinds of loops, right? everybody uses while loops and everybody uses for loops. And depending on whether you like it or not, breaks. And that's basically it. We know all there is to know about loops. Isn't that cool? Yeah? Any questions? No? Shall we just try to do hundreds more examples? um, I'm not gonna do this one, but this one is fun, and hopefully it's not. Let's do it. I think we did something like this with recursion, right? Hopefully it's not the assignment. How can we check whether a number contains a given digit, right? Divide by, well, get the modulo 10, right? See whether that's a digit, right? So let me do this. Yeah. So if number modulo 10 equals the digit, right? We know that it has it, right? And then what we can do, right? What we need to do, divide by 10 and then try again, right? So what we need to do is while do if we get out of there, right, then we know that it's false, right? That will probably work. And since we are doing integer division, right, eventually number is going to be 0. And 123 contains digit 1. 4. So what do we expect to get from this?
True, false,
Yay! Yes.
Why do we need that number equals number divided by 10?
Because
First digit?
actually this finds out the last digit,
And the other
right?
one, the first?
This one eliminates that last digit from the number. So if you had 123, right, the next, you check, I'm looking for the number 1, right? I have 123. Okay, I check the 3, it's not it. Now I need to check 12, right? Does that make sense? So once for checking 12, I'll check 2 and then I'll check 1.
Goes to the left.
So exactly that, yeah. eliminates the last digit. Or the last digit. Does this idea make sense? And we did this with recursion, right?
No, it's in the calling mode.
Oh, it's also encoding bad? We did it with recursion. We did it
Yeah.
in one of the videos, one of the examples. But it's pretty. What else? Thank you. Our string contains. This is kind of getting us into the next stage, but how can we check whether a string contains a character, right? And there is actually a method that will do it automatically, but we are building it ourselves, right? What can we do? What can we ask a string about that will let us know, right? Char add returns the character at a given point, right? And length tells me how many characters there are, right?
Yeah, string length.
Yeah. So int I equals 0, I less than s dot length. If I find the character, what do I do? It contains it, right? Otherwise, does this make sense?
Can we do it with while?
Can we do it with while? Yes, we can. This is exactly the same, right? So while, so this, I can do this syntactically, right? Move this outside, right? Move this to the end, right? Right at the end. And then just replace this with while. They are completely equivalent. A for loop is just a prettier way of writing a while loop. Let's go see that it actually does that, right? See, string contains. Yay! Now let's go look at it again, right? Does this idea make sense? Most people tend to use a for loop for this particular pattern because it has, right? This is exactly what a for loop is for. It basically makes it pretty, as opposed to now my body has everything together. But let's actually verify that it's the right thing. True, true, false. Could we do it with a Do while, well, yes, as long as we don't pass empty strings, right? Until we false, true, false. What else is interesting? Let's go to coding bat and find something. And I'm actually cheating, right? We are using strings almost as arrays. Um, but, or should we do, let's go try the recursive ones, but do them, right? Most of the recursive ones weren't really recursive. Oh, let's do factorial. We haven't done that more than 20 times. How could we do factorial? What is the factorial of a number?
So 1 into 2.
N times whatever in minus 1.
Yep. So we can do, what do we want to do? A for loop, a while loop? I is 0, right? I less than n. I want to start at 1 and stop, right? Does this make sense?
Can we just put a while loop before for while n greater than 0? Then the for loop can come before the for loop.
What do you mean? While
N greater than 1.
like this? Or instead of the for loop?
Just remove the negative case.
You maybe, but you wouldn't do it with a while. You could have an if statement, right? There is no reason to have a while and the for inside. The other thing is you may want to. Sorry, what would happen here if we pass it a negative number? What would it return? It would return 1, right? It would just not do this. Is I less than or equal to n? No, it's 1, and that's negative, so just returns 1. Right? Unless we go study math and figure out what's the factorial of a negative number. This is good enough, right? So we wouldn't really need that. But let's actually do this. Let's go play. Print a bunch of stars. Actually, maybe. Actually, we probably should do it. Do we have? Well, hopefully we. I'm hoping that I don't solve the assignment. But how can we do string times? Replicate a string a bunch of times. Sorry?
You have to concatenate it, whatever that word is.
Yes,
Yeah.
concatenated, yeah.
So, do we use recursion or without?
Without recursion. Now we are doing loops.
It's the for loop.
Yeah.
You can while loop, you have to put that.
We can basically do, right? Instead of this, right, I just doing ans plus equals s. Right? Oh, and it's not letting me because I need to initialize it to something. By the way, this is kind of outside the scope, but let me just mention that if performance is important, this is horrible code because you are creating new objects all the time. Java has a string buffer class that lets you do this in slightly faster ways. 99% of the time you don't care about performance, so this is good enough. So we can do string loops. Sorry?
Something wrong with the function.
Static. There's nothing wrong with it now. It doesn't work, but there's nothing wrong with it. Probably want. So we can put spaces or something like that. Any other interesting things?
Fibonacci series.
Fibonacci series? Yeah, that one is slightly prettier in this case, right? The nth number in the Fibonacci series, right? Ooh, this is interesting. This is the previous number, right? And I'm gonna start it with 1. Ah, God. 4 and 2. Ah, God. Oh, that's cool. Int fib, right? Equals 1. I equals 0. I less than n, because I want to get the nth one, right? Plus plus I. What do I do? Well, fib equals. Oh, wait. I can't, right?
I equal to 1.
Int temp equals fib, and then preb equals fib. Right? That. So let's see. Is this We may be off by 1 or something like that.
0, 0 plus 1.
If you, yeah, Fibonacci of 0 is 1. Actually, Fibonacci of 0 is 0, then
Yeah.
I don't know.
Fibonacci 1 and 2 is 1.
that depends on how you define. That depends on how you define the sequence.
Minus 3.
Sorry?
Should be minus 3. Fibonacci of 0.
Minus 3?
Minus 1 and minus 3.
Oh, yeah, I don't
That's
know.
minus
Let's
1,
see.
No, it's like
And
0.
minus 1 plus
Fibonacci sequence depends on how they define it. They either start with 2 ones or a 0 and a 1. By convention, the sequence begins either with f of 0 equals 0 or so f of 0 is 0. So that's good, right? So that is good. In this case, oh. Oh. That doesn't quite work, right? Oh yeah, it would. Yeah, yeah, right? Maybe. Let's go do stuff. Actually,
I think for 0 it will not.
we can check. We can write a for loop. Right? Zero is 1. 1 is 1. 2 is 2. Oh wait, we messed up.
Yeah.
We messed something up, right? We're starting right, except that we are messing it up.
It doubles it each time.
5 should be
It.
Yeah, you did actually.
This should be 10.
I was gonna
Not
say,
3.
you didn't use temp at all, just for useless.
Does this make sense? Cool. We will do some more loop examples next class. Look over the assignment, right? And if you have questions, you can ask them, and we can. It will all make sense when you, but you need to start trying, right? So if you have a chance, look over the assignment, maybe attempt 1 or 2. We have officially covered everything. You just need to do more examples.
you show Fibonacci.
Sorry?
You show Fibonacci.
Yes. But actually, let me show you guys one thing. I don't know. I think I mentioned it. I'm gonna be posting this stuff in here. So why? Fact. Commit minus am Feb27. They are right here. Sure. I mean, If you remind me, then I'll make sure that I do this after every class. It's still not perfect because if we change stuff in the middle of the class, then you have to look at the video, but somewhere in here is Fibonacci, right? There it is. Cool. And I will see you guys eventually.